Today I want to talk about the non-dualism of music. Music is a dynamic process. You know, um, I want to start off with a quote from Nagarjuna: "Whatsoever has already arisen will not be able to arise. Whatsoever has not arisen will not arise. Either a phenomena has already arisen or else it will arise. There is no other possibility beyond these two." This is talking about sort of, I guess, deathlessness within the concept of Buddhism, which we could understand, sort of the unmediated consciousness with no determinants, not attached to the past or attached to the future in any way, just purely what is. Not the immediate, because the immediate doesn't really exist. It's, always passing between two things, but the unmediated. So, if we apply this concept to music, music has already and always has been arisen. You know what I mean? It's a singular essence itself. So it's kind of, it's existed since the dawn of time. It's present in all things. If we go back to the beginning of music, we invented instruments to try to imitate bird songs. So we were imitating nature, and that's where sort of, our original phrases, rhythm, timbre comes from. And then as it's traveled throughout the ages, it's basically, been built upon that. And it's part of this one sort of big dynamic dialectical process. It's music itself, like, you can only really be the drain pipe through which the fluid, which is the essence of music, passes through. You're not the wellspring of its origin. You can never become the wellspring of its origin, and that's because, if we actually think about it, before you were born, music existed. You were born, you listened to music. This music inspires you to want to become a musician. You learn the musical instrument, and then you learn to imitate those which you are interested in, and that's what sort of, creates the direction or creates the path by which you go down to then create your own music, and your own, I guess I would put in quotations, because no matter what you do, there is no singular originality. That's why being competitive about it is absurd, really, because you can't win in music. You can only really be freed by becoming part of the collective process of creation, but being a sort of a representation of all of the of your musical ideal, a bag of tricks that you've sort of created from everyone you're interested in. And say Jimi Hendrix was like that. He's got a lot of different sort of licks, quotes that he took from the musicians he liked. And when he played really well, it's like he was this little sort of, he was doing like a small variation of, the entire history of recorded music, from sort of the noise and, extreme feedback that sounds much like, avant-garde jazz, like Eric Dolphy, who he was really into. Also going back to the nature thing, it sounds a bit like, bird song, or sometimes sounds like the call of the loon, many different animals are present there, and then all the chords, the harmony, all of those things relating to every type of music you could pretty much possibly imagine in a kind of, simple essence. And I think that's why he was such a brilliant musician. But, what made his stuff original is, is the experience you bring to that. It's what, when you listen to something and you're inspired by it, it's also trying to tell you something about yourself, right? It's tapping into the code of your nature, and that's the experience you bring to it. That's why you can have a particular musician who, when they play, everything they do is maybe unoriginal. It's taken from someone else, but it's all put together to create sort of a structure that is new in a sense, but is also, uses building blocks and materials that have already existed. But what makes them original or unique is the way they feel those things, the way they put it across. They're really, in a way, passionately putting forth their love for these things, and that's what, taps us in, that's what makes us sort of, so interested in it. It's kind of like, a charismatic preacher, the passion they have for God is what wins people over, the way they put that kind of stuff across, so I think the sooner one realizes that you're a part of a collective experience, the more freeing it becomes, since we live in the age where people say everything has already been done, a million times over. We could either use that as kind of a depressing notion of like, we just sort of live at the end of musical history. We can never be, this name that's cemented in the history books as being a true innovator. That's all part of the competitive spirit. If you kind of, if you're in it to be seen as some kind of legend, some sort of idol kind of thing, then yeah, maybe that is not going to be possible for you. But there's another sense, if everything's already been done, then it's kind of freeing, isn't it? That means we're free to kind of, pick and choose from that which we like, and just sort of, put across our passion for those, musical elements. And that's how we can come up with our own creation, our own way of approaching those things. And so, I think it's definitely, it's just part of a collective process, from the people that don't play music, that invented the musical technologies that we use to play our music. They are a part of your creation. From all these musicians you've never met, which you have heard, that's a part of your sort of creative process, and a great example of realizing something entirely new and creating an entirely new experience is in the piece Everywhere at the End of Time, which is built from music that, musical recordings that existed a long time ago, but he finds something, Leland Kirby finds something new in those structures and the way he puts it all together to represent dementia, and I think it's, to me, I think it's the greatest work thus far in the 21st century, maybe even across all mediums. I think it is the most significant work because it shows how, the boundless imagination we have, that even if we take things exactly as they were, in terms of the way he took other people's recordings, we can make something entirely new from it, right? An experience that's entirely new. And I think that's very freeing, but, it's a common thing where, I play jazz music, I watch a video on the legendary saxophonist Chris Potter, and often in the comments you'll see people saying, man, I don't know whether to sort of cry of joy or of anguish, because I feel like I want to quit my instrument. I'm never going to be able to do this. And I think, to me that's always a funny kind of conception, because because Chris Potter put all this work in, he is able to create someone like you. You can always take a couple of small things he does and play that within your own limitations. I feel, to me, when I hear someone like Chris Potter, that's how I go from just being this middling kind of, idiot that just plays some sort of atypical stuff, to playing things that I think are outside and beyond myself. That's, he's a direct channel to the collective. I start doing something that's universal, something that's really kind of tapping in to music as it is, rather than just, maybe the more singular, boring things that I tend to play, and that's, so, to me, when I hear a great musician, it's just so freeing, I'm so thankful that they exist and they put in the work for us. And I think, it's really noble what they did, putting in all these hours just to create something for us, and in a world that's, ungrateful towards that kind of stuff, Artists certainly get the short end of the stick these days. You do something that's original enough, then what will you do? You'll just enable AI's ability to do something better than you, probably. You're just a part of training the system. But, you could also see it as you're a part of the collective. But I think, with AI, it's a bit more dubious, because they're not going to compensate you in any way, which they certainly should compensate you if they're to take all the works of every writer who's ever existed, at least the ones that are still living should be compensated in some way. You should get royalties for being able to create this, but I guess that, that's another conversation. And, say like the book Ulysses by James Joyce, it's probably my favorite novel. Yes, I know I am a pretentious pseudo-intellectual, but to me, I actually think it's a really funny book. I think it's really enjoyable to read, which I know is not what a lot of people think, but that's because I think, even though he does all of this dense, difficult stuff, he does it in a very light-hearted sense. But anyway, my point being that, I think a writer said of Joyce, that Ulysses is the book of which we are all indebted to, and of which we cannot escape whether we like it or not. And that's because it was such a great technical innovation. He showed as far as writing could go, from all of the different styles, from pastiching something, from parodying other people's works, or to sort of using a mixture of all these things to create something new, in terms, if we were to view it like a scientific document, it showed all of the possible processes of literature, and that's why I think it's an essential book to read. And you don't have to read it and necessarily even like it, but you can get something from it for your own creation, and I think, to me, like, what I like about Joyce is he's so free in the way he expounds upon all of the works that he likes, and if you're competitive, then you'll be intimidated. You look at it and go, wow, this guy expects me to know the entire history of Western literature to be able to get what he's coming at. But, to me, that's kind of like reading the annotated edition. It doesn't really matter getting all of those political allusions, understanding obscure facts about Irish politics from the years 1904 to 1916, all of this kind of stuff. It doesn't add to the enjoyment of the text. I don't think you need to get those things. And so, Joyce said Ulysses was for the everyman, and a lot of people thought he was being facetious, but I actually agree, because the everyman is the one that's free to read it, because he's not hindered by this need to understand every detail. The everyman is free to just plunge into the abyss, cycle through it, and see it in their own light, whereas, the scholar or the academic, they're the ones who are going to find it a boring, difficult text, because they want to know every reference, they want to know every parody, every little thing that's going on to put the picture together. But to me, I don't really care about those things, because they don't add to the enjoyment of it. To me, the experience of reading it is the experience of the musical quality of words, of which he had a great talent for. And I love that, me, as an autodidact high school dropout who just felt like, the biggest idiot in the world, I suddenly became very self-conscious about how stupid I was in my early 20s, and just desperately wanted to be able to find some meaning and do something that would make people take me seriously. And so I guess I pushed myself to read that, and actually was, pleasantly surprised by what I found, because I really liked that he, would drag all of these high concepts through the mud, and would really sort of, would seem to always have this tone of kind of, mockery towards himself and towards the kind of pimply face academic, and also towards the superiority complex of the academic. And I think that's, a great kind of, that's why he's such an essential kind of Irish writer in that sense. He was kind of, shunning and mocking the kind of pomposity of the English writer and their, view of themselves as being entirely superior to the Irish and to all other cultures. He was really having a lot of fun with what he was doing, and I loved that. I found that most people's criticism of Joyce is, less because it's so difficult, but more because he's not serious enough about these difficult things. What is he really saying? There's no actual truth here, or, is he really putting forth anything? They're very much, where is the argument kind of thing, whereas, to me, I think, it's, it's really free from that responsibility. And yeah, it's a great book to read. And I think is, a literary version of Everywhere at the End of Time, because it takes all these pre-existing styles and concepts, and then builds upon that, shows how you can take things that already exist and use them almost quite literally to then create something new. So, I think we actually live in a very freeing time in that sense. It's great that everything's already been done, because then you're free to kind of, go at it as you please. So, just remember to enjoy the process of what you're doing and realize that, music is a sort of direct evidence of us all being one. We're all a part of building this grand cathedral. If you feel sort of intimidated by, Stockhausen or some particular musician, remember that you were also a part of Stockhausen. You were also a part of this, great grand cathedral of music in which we are all building. Even non-musicians build it because they influence the experience of other musicians that then gets, translated into the world of music. So, it's like absolutely everything that exists influences music in some sense. So, stop being so overly competitive and worrying about, whether you'll be seen as some sort of, singular legend, and just get about creating, and enjoy the process. Don't let it become a chore. Don't let it become something that, causes you stress. Go about it in the, the naive, innocent way a child does, where they're just enjoying themselves, loving the act of creation and getting into it, I think that's it. Sorry if this was incoherent. I hope if you guys enjoy my content that you will like and subscribe. I'm going to really take this YouTube thing seriously and keep making more and more videos. I'm getting better over time. I'm learning how to edit. I will stop doing just these, soliloquies and endless, boring monologues, and we'll start actually putting in text and references, all the rest of it. And so, please bear with me in that sense. And whoever does watch this, I love you very much for doing so, and I really thank you for that, because I'm just astonished that anyone would want to listen to me even for a minute or two, and I really, really am just beyond grateful that people would do that. And I love you all, and just want this to be a way that I can connect with people, because I feel extremely alone, as all of us do these days. And yeah, I just want to get out of my head. I want to be, stuck in the solipsistic world of myself. I really don't like that. I want to project myself outward and be a part of other people. And me, I'm not, a misanthrope. I love people. I love everyone. I don't think people are NPCs and just, absolute idiots. I think everyone has a divine light and a great intuitive intelligence. Anyway, Om Mani Padme Hum.